Dear students, I warmly welcome you to this lecture on Mao Zedong and his political ideology. The lecture aims to achieve several key objectives, including to provide a brief overview of Mao Zedong's life and political career, to examine his thought as a distinct ideology, to explore the key principles and concepts of Maoism, to analyze the impact of the Great Leap Forward on China, to discuss criticisms of Mao's political ideology, including his authoritarianism, cult of personality, and disregard for human rights, to evaluate the lasting impact of his policies on Chinese politics and society. Overall, this lecture aims to provide an essence of Mao Zedong's life, thoughts, and legacy, shedding light on one of the most influential figures in modern Chinese history. Let me begin by giving you an introduction about Mao Zedong's life. Mao Zedong, also known as Chairman Mao, was a Chinese communist revolutionary, politician, and theorist who played a central role in the establishment and development of People's Republic of China. He was born on December 26, 1893 in Shoshan, Hunan Province, China, and died on September 9, 1976 in Beijing. Mao Zedong came from a peasant family and grew up in a rural setting. He received a basic education and later became involved in revolutionary activities. Inspired by the 1911 Xinhai Revolution, which led to the overthrow of Qing dynasty, Mao joined the Chinese Communist Party in 1921. He quickly rose through the party ranks and became one of the key figures in the early years of Communist Party of China. Mao Zedong's most significant contribution came during the Chinese Civil War between the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party led by Chiang Kai-shek. Under Mao's leadership, the Chinese Communist Party emerged victorious, and on October 1, 1949, Mao proclaimed the establishment of People's Republic of China. He became the chairman of the Communist Party and the country's head of the state. Mao Zedong's ideology and policies are collectively known as Maoism. He believed in the importance of class struggle and saw peasants as the driving force for revolution in a predominantly agrarian society like China. Some of Mao's notable policies and initiatives include land reform. Mao implemented a land redistribution program aiming to eliminate feudalism and empower peasants by redistributing land from landlords to the landless. Great Leap Forward, launched in 1958, this campaign aimed to transform China into an industrialized socialist society. However, it resulted in economic mismanagement, mass starvation, and the death of millions of people in China. Cultural Revolution, initiated in 1966, this movement aimed to eliminate capitalist and traditional elements from Chinese society. It led to widespread social and political upheaval with the purges, violence, and the persecution of intellectuals and perceived opponents of the regime. Mao's quotations, known as the Little Red Book, were widely distributed and considered a guiding ideology for Chinese population during the Cultural Revolution. Mao's tenure as chairman of the Communist Party and his policies had a profound impact on the China and the world. While his leadership is often praised for unifying China and ending centuries of imperial rule, his policies are also resulted in significant human suffering, particularly during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. He served as the country's leader until his death in 1976. Mao's works include numerous political treatises such as On New Democracy and On Protracted War. He also wrote poetry and essays on various topics, including art and culture. Mao's cult of personality, which portrayed him as an infallible leader, contributed to excesses and abuses that occurred during his rule. Despite the controversy surrounding some of his policies and actions, Mao remains a significant figure in Chinese history and a source of inspiration for many. His legacy continues to shape China's political and social landscape to this day. Now, let me come to Mao's political thought and Maoism. Maoism refers primarily to ideology, politics, and writings of Mao Zedong. In official Chinese discourse, the term Mao Zedong thought is used rather than Maoism out of the deference to Marxism-Leninism. It can also refer to the ideology of groups who take Mao Zedong as a political model, or to the official role of Mao in the orthodoxy of the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong's political ideas were primarily shaped by his experiences as a revolutionary and his understanding of Marxist-Leninist theory. He developed his own variant of communism known as Maoism or Mao Zedong thought, which he believed was a more relevant and adaptable form of socialism for China's unique conditions. Some of the critical aspects of Mao's political ideas are class struggle. Mao emphasized the importance of class struggle as the primary driving force for social change. He believed that the working class, led by the Communist Party, should overthrow the bourgeoisie, capitalist class, and establish a classless society. Mass line. Mao emphasized the concept of mass line, which called for the Communist Party to closely align itself with the interests and aspirations of common people, mainly the peasants, who constituted the majority of the Chinese population. The mass line involved a bottom-up approach to governance, seeking to understand and address the needs of the masses. Protracted people's war. Mao advocated for using guerrilla warfare and protracted people's war as a strategy for revolution. He believed that a small, dedicated revolutionary force could gradually gain support and strengthen from the rural population, ultimately overpowering the enemy. New democracy. Prior to establishment of the People's Republic of China, Mao advocated for a new democratic stage of revolution, which involved forming a united front with other progressive forces, including the national bourgeoisie, to overthrow imperialism and feudalism. This concept aimed to unite various social classes against common enemies before transitioning to socialism. Permanent revolution. Mao's concept of permanent revolution called for continuous revolutionary struggle even after the establishment of socialist state. He believed that the revolution should continue to transform and improve society, preventing the emergence of a new capitalist class within the socialist system. Self-reliance. Mao emphasized the importance of self-reliance and independence from the external powers. He promoted the idea of China pursuing its own path of development, free from domination by foreign powers, particularly imperialist forces. It's important to note that the Mao's political ideas were implemented through various policies and campaigns, some of which had significant negative consequences. The Great Leap Forward, for example, and the Cultural Revolution, in particular, resulted in economic hardships, mass famine, and political purges. While Mao's ideas had a significant impact on China, they remain a highly debated and interpreted differently by different scholars and political factions. Now, let me come to one of the important aspects of Mao's political ideology, which is about Great Leap Forward and its impact. The initiative was led by Mao Zedong. Mao's official goal was to rapidly evolve China from an agrarian economy into a modern industrial society with a greater ability to compete with Western industrialized nations. With this in mind, the Great Leap Forward was a 5-year plan of forced agricultural collectivization and rural industrialization that were instituted by Chinese Communist Party in 1958. While it was intended to transform China into a socialist industrialized nation, the campaign ended up causing significant economic and humanitarian crisis within China. It resulted in a sharp contraction in the Chinese economy and between 30 to 45 million deaths by starvation and suicide out of desperation. In 1958, Mao announced his plan for a Great Leap Forward, which he laid out as a 5-year plan to improve the economic prosperity of the People's Republic of China. He devised the plan after touring China and concluding that he felt the Chinese people were capable of anything. Overall, the plan was centered around two fundamental goals: collectivizing agriculture and widespread industrialization, with two main targets: increasing grain and steel production. Some of the key features and policies of the Great Leap Forward are: agriculture collectivization. The Great Leap Forward aimed to rapidly collectivize agriculture with the formation of communes as the primary unit of agriculture organization. Private ownership of land was abolished and peasants were organized into large-scale communal farms. Backyard steel furnaces. As part of the push for industrialization, Mao encouraged the establishment of small-scale decentralized steel production facilities in rural areas. These backyard steel furnaces were intended to boost steel production and support industrial growth, but ultimately resulted in poor quality steel and the diversion of resources from agriculture. Mass mobilization and communal living. The campaign emphasized mass mobilization with the promotion of communal living arrangements, shared dining halls and communal child rearing. Private households were dismantled and communal kitchens and dormitories became common. The idea was to promote collective labor and eliminate perceived inefficiencies of individual households. Exaggerated production targets. Local officials were pressurized to report exaggerated production figures to demonstrate the success of the Great Leap Forward. This led to the manipulation of statistics, contributing to the misrepresentation of actual production levels. Now let me discuss some of the consequences of the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was supposed to be a 5-year plan, but it was called off after just 3 tragic years. The period between 1958 and 1960 is known as the 3 bitter years in China. It had political repercussions for Mao Zedong as well. As the originator of the disaster, he ended up being sidelined from power until 1967, when he called for cultural revolution. While it was intended to rapidly transform China into a socialist and industrialized nation, the campaign ended up causing significant economic and humanitarian crisis. Some of the visible and far-reaching consequences of the Great Leap Forward on China are: famine and humanitarian crisis. One of the most devastating consequences of the Great Leap Forward was the widespread famine that resulted from disruptions in agriculture production and the mismanagement of resources. The combination of forced collectivization, the backyard steel furnaces, and the unrealistic production targets led to a severe decline in agriculture output. As a result, tens of millions of people died from starvation, malnutrition, and related diseases during this period, making it one of the deadliest famines in the history. Economic setbacks, the another important consequence of Great Leap Forward. The economic consequences of Great Leap Forward were dire. The divergence of resources and labor from agriculture to backyard steel production and other industrial projects led to decline in agriculture productivity. The unrealistic production targets and the manipulation of statistics further exacerbated economic setbacks. The campaign failed to achieve its goal of rapid industrialization and instead resulted in economic stagnation and regression. Another consequence of the Great Leap Forward was the political fallout and shifts in power. The failure of the Great Leap Forward had significant political ramifications. Mao Zedong's leadership and policies came under intense criticism both within the Chinese Communist Party and among the general population. This criticism ultimately led to a shift in power dynamics within the party, with Mao temporarily stepping down from his position as head of the state in the year 1959. Loss of intellectual and cultural heritage is another consequence of the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was accompanied by a campaign to eliminate perceived bourgeoisie elements from Chinese society, including traditional customs, cultural artifacts, and intellectual pursuits. Many intellectuals, artists, and scholars were targeted and persecuted, resulting in a loss of valuable cultural and intellectual heritage. The suppression of dissent and the promotion of Mao's personality cult also stifled intellectual and artistic freedom. All these consequences of Great Leap Forward led to the re-evaluation of policies and the four modernizations. The failure of the Great Leap Forward prompted a re-evaluation of policies within the Chinese Communist Party. After Mao's temporary retreat from political scene, the focus shifted towards more pragmatic economic policies during the late 1960s and 1970s. This eventually led to adoption of the four modernizations under Deng Xiaoping, which aimed to reform and modernize China's agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology. Indeed, the impact of the Great Leap Forward was immense, resulting in the loss of millions of lives, a setback in China's economic development and political and social upheaval. It stands as the stark reminder of the dangers of implementing radical policies without adequate planning and consideration for their potential consequences. Let me come to now criticism which was raised against Mao Zedong's political thought. Mao Zedong's leadership and policies have been the subject of significant criticism from various perspectives. While some praised his contributions to China's revolution and unifications, others highlight the negative consequences and the shortcomings of his rule. Mao has been criticized on several grounds. Firstly, Mao's implementation of the Great Leap Forward is heavily criticized for its disastrous consequences. The campaign's emphasis on unrealistic production targets, forced collectivization, and the diversion of resources led to widespread famine and the deaths of tens of millions of people in China. Critics argue that Mao's policies and mismanagement contributed directly to humanitarian crisis within China. Secondly, the Cultural Revolution initiated by Mao in 1966 resulted in political purges, widespread violence, and the persecution of intellectuals, artists, and perceived opponents of regime. The campaign led to significant social and economic disruptions, loss of cultural heritage, and the suppression of dissent. Mao's cult of personality and his encouragement of mass movements are seen as contributing to political repression and chaos during this period. Thirdly, Mao's economic policies, particularly during the Great Leap Forward, are criticized for their disregard for economic expertise and reliance on ideological fervor. Critics argue that his policies were based on unrealistic ideals rather than sound economic principles, leading to economic setbacks and stagnation. Fourthly, Mao's regime is also criticized for its human rights abuses. This includes the suppression of free speech, political dissent, and basic civil liberties. The actions of the Red Guards and other paramilitary groups during the Cultural Revolution led to widespread violence, destruction, and the violation of human rights in China. Lastly, Mao's cult of personality cultivated during his rule is seen as contributing to one-man rule and the suppression of dissent. This personality cult created an environment where Mao's decisions were unquestioned, leading to a lack of accountability and transparency. Now let us discuss another aspect of this lecture, which is about the impact of Mao on China and its society. The impact of Mao Zedong on China and its society was profound and far-reaching. His leadership and policies shaped the course of Chinese history and continue to influence the country today. Let us delve into some of the key aspects of Mao's impact on China. Mao's leadership was instrumental in success of Communist Party's revolution against the nationalist government. Under his guidance, the People's Liberation Army defeated the nationalist forces and established People's Republic of China in 1949. This marked a radical shift in China's political landscape and led to the formation of socialist state. Mao's policies prioritized land reform and the redistribution of land from landlords to peasants. This agrarian reform aimed to address rural poverty, inequality, and historical grievances. It had a significant impact on the rural population, empowering peasants and increasing their support for the Chinese Communist Party. However, Mao's implementation of the Great Leap Forward resulted in a massive human tragedy and economic setbacks. The campaign's policies and mismanagement led to widespread famine and millions of deaths. Great Leap Forward had a devastating impact on China's economy and society, causing immense suffering and loss. Mao's Cultural Revolution, launched in the year 1966, led to widespread social upheaval, political purge, and the suppression of dissent. The Red Guards, encouraged by Mao, carried out violent campaigns against the perceived enemies of the regime, resulting in significant social and cultural disruptions. The Cultural Revolution had a lasting impact on China's education system, cultural institutions, and political landscape. Mao cultivated a strong cult of personality during his rule, which contributed to a centralized and authoritarian government. While his leadership had both positive and negative impacts on China, it is undeniable that Mao's legacy continues to shape the country's political and social landscape. In conclusion, Mao Zedong's impact on China was complex and far-reaching. Mao Zedong, commonly known as Mao, was a Chinese communist revolutionary and the founding father of People's Republic of China. His political ideology, Maoism, is a variant of Marxism-Leninism that emphasized the role of peasants and the importance of revolutionary struggle. Mao's ideology was based on the belief that the working class alone could not bring about a socialist revolution. Instead, he believed that the peasants who made up the majority of China's population were the key to revolution. Mao also believed in the importance of constant revolutionary struggle, which he saw as necessary to prevent the emergence of a new ruling class. Mao's political ideology had a profound impact on China and the world. Under his leadership, China underwent a series of radical social and economic changes, including the collectivization of agriculture and the establishment of communes. While Mao's policies had some success, they also led to widespread famine and political repressions within China. With this, dear students, I conclude today's lecture. I hope you have found it beneficial. I look forward to seeing you again for our next lecture, which will cover a different topic. Until then, take care and goodbye.